Hi everybody, and welcome to today's virtual session. So as we are in January now, one of the things I thought would be quite nice would to be do something which would be inspiring for the new year, new beginning, new start. And I found a image of a crocus just coming up through some snow, so I thought that would be quite symbolic. So this is what I'm going to guide you how to paint today. So watercolor is what we're going to use, and as always with all the images that I use in these sessions, I get them from a website called Pixabay, and they're really good because they do royalty free images. So I'll make sure you've got the link to this so that you can paint along with me. As I've also said before, if you want to sort of just go in freehand like I do, that's absolutely fine. Or if you prefer to print it, what you can do is you can then just sort of turn it over and just get a pencil, draw some pencil on the back of this, make sure it covers the area, and then put it down, get another pencil and just sort of draw around the outlines, and then you'll basically get a trace on the paper. Of course, just make sure that you don't have another piece of paper behind it, because you want the pencil to go straight down onto the surface you're going to be painting on, so that it will then sort of take a transfer of it. Okay, but as I've said, what we're going to do is I'm going to do this freehand, which I do recommend to start with, because it really does help build your observational skills. Now, lots of watercolor kits come like this. It's called a pan set. If you've seen any of my other virtual sessions, then you will recognize this is a very, very well loved one. As you can see, it comes with a palette and a little brush here. Just take it apart. Now for this, it doesn't matter if you're using a pan set like this, if you're using a set similar to this, or if you've got tubes of watercolor paint, or even watercolor pencils. Whatever you've got will work for this. If you're using watercolor pencils, then of course what you'll want to do is you'll want to just draw and color using the pencils, and then once you've sort of done that, you then get a little bit of water on a brush and then just start to break up the pigment of the colouring pencil, and then that will give it that sort of watercolour effect. If you're using tubes of paint, just pop a little bit of the colours that you will need onto a palette. You won't need too much, probably about the size of a pea. So you'll need some green, you'll need some blue, a little bit of red, depending on what tubes of colour you've got. But if you've got something like this, then I will show you as we go along. Also, it doesn't matter what size brush you've got, as long as you're comfortable with it, but I would recommend you use a roundhead brush. Okay, so I'm going to go straight in with this, and we're going to start with the flower itself. So I'm going to go in with a little bit of my darker blue to start with. I'm just going to pop this here. And as I've said before, what you want to do when you're doing anything like this where you're working from a reference is you want to dart your gaze backwards and forwards constantly. This helps you to get proportion. And the other thing is, try and make sure that if you have printed it out, or if you're looking at it on a laptop or a tablet or anything like that, try and have it sort of straight in front of you alongside the surface you're working on, because if you've sort of got it slightly tilted like that, then you'll end up doing the slightly wrong angle. So try and keep it sort of as even as you can. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to just build a basic shape, and once I start to run out of paint, I'm just going to add a spot of water, and I'm just going to start to move the paint that I've got here around, because I want quite a light layer. Okay, and I'm going to go in with a little bit more. I'm going to go in with a little bit of sort of the slightly brighter blue. So I've got two blues here. I've got a sort of slightly brighter one and a little sort of navy-ish darker blue. Now, of course, depending on what colours you've got available, use sort of as close as you can to get the colours. Okay, and I'm also going to pop a little bit of this crimson in here, because it's a little bit sort of a purple hue to this. So I'm just going to add that in and let it blend. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just wash that out of my brush, and I'm going to move on to my greens. I'm going to start to put some of these little greens in. Now I'm doing this quite lightly. The good thing about using a small brush is if you're doing something botanical like this, where you're doing sort of leaves and flowers and stems, then it does allow you to be quite delicate. But if you're using a larger brush, what you want to do is you want to hold it further up here. That way you'll get a nice sort of light, delicate flick. If you're going further down, you'll start to put more pressure on it, and then you'll get a slightly different tone of paint. Alright, so I'm just going to start to put some of this in. So I'm just building this up bit at a time, bit at a time. Something I'm going to quickly show you, I'll do it over on this side here, is what I mentioned a second ago about pressure when you're painting. And again, this works with whatever size brush. So if I hold it up here and just do a line across there, you can see it's quite fine. Now if I hold it sort of midway, see it's a little bit thicker. If I hold it right down, it starts to fan out a little bit. So always bear that in mind whenever you're painting, so that you'll get used to the sorts of paint marks that you can create. And also think about paint to water ratio. So of course when we're using watercolour, it's all about how you use the water. It's not just how you use the paint. So if you want to have a sort of lighter tone of something, then you can add more water. That will dilute the colour, make it much lighter. If you want it to be a little bit more vibrant, then you add more paint. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in with a little bit of the darkest brown that I've got. It's a little bit sort of brown in here, and I'm just going to start to pop this in just around. Now of course, because this crocus is just sort of popping out of the snow, and the snow is quite tricky to see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop the snow in by just doing some sort of indications of blue here and there, and just quite lightly, just so that there's that indication that it is actually coming out of something, so it's not just sort of floating in the air. All right, so I'm just going to work a little bit more on this. Let's pop the center in. Okay, and just keep building it up bit at a time. I'm going to pop a little bit of crimson just to let that blend in there. There we go. So you can blend one colour on top of the other, as you can see. That does work with with watercolour, because you can just start to use the water to blend. And actually, as that has just happened, I don't know if you can see that, I'm going to show you how you can erase things if you do have a little bit of a mishap whilst you're painting. What you do is, of course, wash out your brush and just use the water to erase the paint as best you can. Alright, so that's a little tip, so that if you do happen to drop your brush and you get paint all over the place, you can more or less erase it. Okay, so let's go and do a little bit more just to define this little flower a little bit. Okay, and also, as I said, I'm going to put some sort of light indications of snow around. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of really quickly just flicking the brush into some blue paint here, just to give the indication that it's actually snow that we're looking at here. And I'm just going to do that very, very lightly around it. And then I'm going to use my water just to dilute that a bit, just pulling that paint outwards. A little bit more here. Right, so again, use the water to your advantage. Use the water to move the paint around. Okay, and then what you can do, as you may have seen in some of my other virtual sessions, is you can also add pen to this just to make things pop a little bit more. So I'm going to put a little bit of blue here, and I'm just going to put some little spots of blue, and then I'm going to use my water here just to fade that out a little bit. Okay, so as I said, it's how you use that water. I'm going to have a little bit of blue up here, so I'm just going to pop this to one side. So again, this is what we are working from. I'm just going to pop a little bit of blue there, and then I'm going to, so I've just washed that paint out. I'm now going to just start to move that paint around a bit, like so. Okay, so you can see it's starting to come together a bit now. I'm going to go in with a little bit more green because I want these to stand out a little bit. It's always worth sort of having a look at your painting from afar sometimes, particularly if you've been sort of looking at it for quite some time. You can lose focus on it, and that can you know, sort of cause some problems with perspective and composition. So if you sort of look at it at arm's length sometimes, you know, that can really sort of help you to see what you might need to do next, and just experiment. All right, so I'm going into my darkest brown now, just for the little bit of earth that we can see beneath the snow there. All right, so again, as I said, just sort of a nice way to welcome in the new year, new beginnings. We've got these little flowers that are popping up through the cold and the ice, but they're persevering. All right, so I've got two different types of green here, so I'm just putting the other green on top just to add some more detail here. And then I'm going to go into my darkest blue again and just add a bit more of that just to the bottom here. All right. Yeah, I'm just going to have a little bit more for this snow. I want that to just be a little bit more apparent, so we know that it is snow and ice that's happening. And again, you can dilute that and move that around using your water. Okay, and you can make that as obvious or as subtle as you like, just depending on how much blue you want to add. If you want it to look a little bit icier, you can. If you want it to be more subtle, just use more water. Okay, I'm just going to use my water now just to take out that hard edge. All right, so again, we can see this edge here, just this little bit. I'm just going to start to blend that a little bit so it's not quite so obvious. There we go. Okay, and then whilst that's drying, before I go in with my pen just to pick out a little bit, I'm going to show you a little bit more on getting different tones, particularly if you find you've only got one type of blue available to you. So I'm going to use one type of blue now, and I'm going to load this brush up, and I'm just going to do a little square just to show you. All right, and then I'm going to dip it into the water once, take some of that off. I'm going to go in again, just do a little square. Again, just take some of that paint out, another little square. So you can see you can get lots and lots of different tones just by using the same colour. Right, and I'm going to try and wash that out as much as possible. I'm going to nick a little bit of the paint from here. There we go, so it gets really, really pale. All right, so it is quite versatile. As I've said, even if you've only got one colour, you'll be surprised just what you can do with that, and the same will work with green. Again, you can just, the more paint you've got on your brush, the more vibrant and the deeper the colour will be. If you start putting more water on it, it will get paler, so you'll have a much lighter tone to work with. Okay. So again, that's sort of working with your different tones. All right. And then using a pen. Now this can be any type of pen you like. I'm using what's called a handwriting pen, but you can use a ballpoint pen, a biro, if you wish, because I do that a lot, just to add little details on top of watercolour. So one of the things you do want to do is you want to make sure that the area that you're going to go into and add pen to is dry. So if I just do that, you can see some of the areas that are still glistening. You don't want to put pen on that because it will not work. But the areas that are dry, you can absolutely start to work on those. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the reference just there. Just start to do a little bit of work just around the outside. Again, just a little bit here and there, just as a little indication. You don't need a lot. You don't need to outline absolutely everything unless you want to. I always think, there's plenty of artistic license, so you can have as much or as little as you like. But I do think adding a little bit of pen here and there can be really quite helpful. All right, so I'm just going to add a little bit there, a little bit there. And what that does is that just helps you to sort of add a little bit of definition to some edges. And just do a couple of little outlines here and there where you would like them. And also it just helps to sort of give that indication again of snow. So what I'm going to do is just put some little dots here and there, just to give the idea of some sort of snow and ice. All right, so I'm just going to do that, just so that there's that indication that there is something there. It's not just sitting or floating. Okay. Again, you don't want it to be sort of too much, just very subtle, just a little bit. And I tend to do it in quite a sort of scribbly sort of style, and that does really work well. There we go. And there you go. That's sort of a nice, simple little botanical watercolour painting with a little bit of pen on top, a little bit of practice with line work using the brush, and a little bit of tonal practice by diluting sort of one colour with water to get paler tones as you go. So I hope you found this helpful and enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again soon for another virtual session.